All right, folks, welcome into the transportation working group breakout room. We're just going to give folks a few minutes to jump on. Thanks for joining us for the webinar today and for your interest in learning more about the transportation working group from Mike Williams, who you heard from on the webinar. We're just going to give it a few minutes here. Mike, do you want to go ahead and start your video? Can you do that? All right, there he is. So let's give it another minute here. Let folks jump in if they would like to. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here. My name is Todd Martin. I'm an outreach coordinator with the Natural Resources Council of Maine in Augusta. Thanks again for joining the webinar this afternoon to learn about the Maine Climate Council and the recommendations coming out of the 6 working groups. This is the Transportation Working Group breakout room, joined here by Mike Williams from the Blue Green Alliance, who you heard from during the webinar. Mike, we only have 2 people in this breakout room so far, so you two will be able to ask lots of questions. Please type your question into the chat, and I'm happy to pitch that to Mike. I can also, Hattie and John Burking, I can also just allow you to talk, so I'm happy to just allow you to ask your question verbally if you'd like to. If so, just type that in the chat, or just send your question directly through the chat. But Mike, do you want to just get us started with what the next steps are for the transportation working group, the upcoming meetings, and when you expect the working group to deliver its recommendations to the full council?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Todd. So we are meeting tomorrow, and we have all of our draft strategies laid out in their specific strategy documents. Our co-chairs have done a great job pulling this all together. It's been a Herculean task. And so it's going to be a hard but good, hopefully, conversation tomorrow that we can come to agreement on the wording in those strategies. We roughly have 24 hours to review them, and so hopefully people will get a chance to do that. Then if all goes well, we'll be able to come to some sort of agreement tomorrow on the call. Otherwise, we'll need to work through this process a bit more. But then, the Climate Council meets on June 17th and 18th. So we need to have our strategies to them a bit before that. So if it's not tomorrow, it'll probably be within a week or so.
Great. So are there any questions from Hattie or John specifically for Mike? If you have questions, you can Oh, there's questions in the Q&A. Great.
Yeah, I see it. So how
Yeah.
will you incentivize electric vehicle use? So it's, yeah, that's been, Haiti, I think it looks like that's been a topic of significant discussion in the working group. There's a couple different methods. So we heard from Efficiency Maine about when Governor Mills and Efficiency Maine launched their incentive program, where the state of Maine offers a chunk of money for anybody purchasing an electric vehicle. And it really was Maine's really first big go at trying to do state level incentives for EVs. And so they've been giving us updates on how this has been going. And honestly, it was going great up until obviously the coronavirus stopped everything in its tracks, but it was going well. And there was talk of how we could expand that, how we could have the state of Maine add to the amount of money to make the incentive more attractive to folks, figure out other ways to make it more, not just appealing, but then also accessible to folks who are not, because honestly, EVs are expensive and it's generally been a high income option or an option for high income people. And so how do we make it so it's beyond that? It's for moderate to low income folks. And so, there's ways of like, can we incorporate used electric vehicles into this program? That could be a huge one to really expand the reach of getting EVs into folks' driveways and parking spots. Is also the incentivizing electric vehicle use. Really, it also significantly needs to deal with the question of range anxiety. Basically, I have an electric vehicle. I know it can go even the Chevy Bolt, which actually I have, go 200, 250 miles on one charge. I can't drive from Portland to Bangor and back. I'd have to find a place to charge. And there's only a few places to charge at this point in a fast manner. So incentivizing electric vehicle use is also improving electric vehicle infrastructure, making sure that we have super fast charging stations, that they're available, accessible, all along major throughways, in retail areas, in other commercial areas, in apartment buildings, and town centers of towns, especially in rural Maine, where it would make sense. There's a couple places. So, like for example, Pittsfield, Maine, has an awesome little downtown and a couple little restaurants, but having some electric vehicle charging places around there, things like that. But yeah, that's what we've been thinking.
Great. So welcome to the new folks who have joined us. This is the transportation breakout room. We're joined by Mike Williams from the Blue Green Alliance. If you have questions for Mike about what's going on with the transportation working group, please type them into the Q&A box. And Mike, we have a question from Haiti about a gas tax and whether that's going to include diesel as well.
So we have definitely talked about, and there's been a lot of talk about raising the gas tax in Maine. The Blue Ribbon Commission, which is a separate entity to try to deal with revenues for transportation infrastructure, was tasked with trying to figure this out. They haven't really done that yet, but a fuel tax of some kind is honestly, we need it. So we have a gas tax. It's currently too low. It doesn't match the infrastructure needs. Also, if we're going to greatly expand the use of electric vehicles in our state, the gas tax revenues are going to drop. And so we need to figure out what would be the next way to raise revenues to pay for our state transportation infrastructure. And so that's where we start to think through other options like vehicle miles traveled, way to monitor that, and then you can tax folks. So if you're using public roads, you would then pay for that usage to make sure that we can have decent roads and bridges and such. The other thing that I mentioned was the Transportation and Climate Initiative is really taking a look at the fuels that cause emissions, putting a price on that and having those folks pay into this and using those revenues to deal with our transportation infrastructure, to deal with making sure that all Mainers have equitable access to good transportation options along those lines. So it's a long way to answer your question, Haiti, but dealing with gas tax, dealing with properly taxing diesel emissions. There's a Diesel Emissions Reduction Act program that's a federal program, but it sends money to states. We also took a look at that and how we can really build off of that and try to have maybe potentially have a state version of that plan too. So all definitely options that we have on there.
Great, thanks, Mike.
And if anybody else has any other questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A. I am also a non-Tesla EV driver, Kenneth. I have a Chevy Bolt. And I could not agree more. So Kenneth asks if he says he sees the need for a much more comprehensive level 3 charging infrastructure across our state, and what plans are being formulated to remedy this situation, and how urgently is this seen to be? And he sees it as very urgent. I agree with you. It is very urgent. For those who don't know, level 3 charging is the fastest charging possible. It can get you a significant charge, effectively like many miles worth of a charge. Dozens and dozens, 100 miles charged in a short period of time, 30 minutes or so, or less. And it's something where we have a few spots. You know, one example that comes to mind is at the Gardner rest stop, right where 295 and 95 meet. There's a small bank of fast chargers, so level 3 chargers. But we don't have many at all in the state, and it is a problem. If we're going to have more people using electric vehicles, we need more of these, and specifically, and we need to think about it also in ways that not just like gas stations, because charging isn't something where you just pull up, you charge, and you leave 5 minutes later. They need to be in a spot where folks are sitting for a time. So again, residential, commercial areas where people are going to sit, go out to lunch, go to their job, things along those lines. So your questions, what plans are being formulated to remedy this situation, and how urgently is it seen? There is a push, and it's going to be in the strategies coming from the Transportation Working Group, to do a statewide electric vehicle plan that incorporates just exactly this. We see and have had presentations about the expansions of level 1 and 2 chargers, specifically level 2 chargers. But in the working group, we said that's good, but we also need those super fast chargers. And the point on urgency is this is a major priority for the working group to really lift this up. And we had pretty much full agreement across the whole diverse array. So it's a really good question. And again, as a non-Tesla EV driver, I completely agree.
Great. So before we get to the next question, this is the Transportation Working Group breakout room. Thanks to the folks who have recently joined us. We're joined by Mike Williams from the Blue Green Alliance, who's a member of the Transportation Working Group. If you have questions for Mike, feel free to type them into the Q&A box. We will get to as many questions as we can here. Mike, do you want to take another question?
Sure, yeah. So just really quick, Kenneth just did a follow-up that noting that not only do we need more locations, but we need more charging stalls per station. Absolutely true. One time I was coming back from Bangor, had to stop in at Gardner to charge my car, and I was praying, and it was snowing, and I was praying that those only 2 spots wouldn't be full, and they weren't, thank God. But that's a good point. It can't just be like, it's here, it's here, it's here. There needs to be multiple options in different places. Lucas Brown with the question, what's the most effective way for citizens to demand affordable public transportation options for rural communities? That's a great question, Lucas. And I'll do a quick answer, but Todd his expertise is outreach and such. So I think Todd, please jump in also. So one of the most effective ways is through your legislator. So start with your local legislator and say, especially if you're from a rural community, and say, we need way better affordable public transportation options. We need to think about how we expand bus, potentially rideshare, but preferably bus. If there's opportunities to put rail there, it's something we really do need to think about, expanding Maine's rail capacity. So it's something where starting with your legislator and really getting them and making them see the importance of this. Also about getting involved in organizations who care about these issues, whether it's the Natural Resources Council of Maine, environmental groups like that. There's also the Bicycle Coalition of Maine, and there's and I see Tony Donovan with a question. Tony's organization, the Rail Transit Coalition, if I got that wrong, but they are also another group. Getting involved in groups like that really would be useful, as well as you probably have local organizations, whether it's the Bangor area or outside of Portland. There's probably local and specific orgs. Todd, would you add anything about folks getting involved?
Absolutely. I would also add local councils of governments. The Greater Portland Council of Governments has been a big advocate for expanded public transportation in Maine. And so there are, COGs, councils of governments throughout the state. And so no matter where in the state you live, there's probably a council of government that's working to help expand public transportation in your area, and they're helping municipalities navigate how to expand public transportation. So in addition to the groups that Mike mentioned, I would also check out your local council of government.
Yeah. So I see a question came in from Kenneth Capron, working on a new mode of transportation based on magnetics, but I can't seem to get the Climate Council's attention. It's an option that is more efficient than battery-based EVs and does even more to reduce carbon. Why would a climate group ignore any opportunity in future consideration? Well, on the last question, I don't think we should ignore any ideas on the table. So I don't know about that. I would say, I think if you're talking about magnetics and transportation, maglev, that's the one that springs to my mind. That's a public transit rail-based magnetic levitation technology that's used in Southeast Asia. I think specifically in Japan, and it's in the fastest trains in the world or something like that. China may have one too. Extraordinarily expensive, but extraordinarily cool. I don't know about its efficacy in Maine. You know, we're trying to expand basic rail, light and heavy duty in Maine, just at its basic level. But you know, we are in a climate crisis, and we should be thinking big. So in terms of getting folks to pay attention, you know, on the Climate Council website, there's email addresses for folks. And if you submit it to send something, an email to the co-chairs, specifically of the Transportation Working Group, anytime somebody emails our co-chair, she will forward it to all of us on the working group, and then it can become a topic of discussion. So I'd encourage you to do that. I see I missed a question from Haiti, but I already answered one, so I'll come back to that. But I'll go to the next one. Tony Donovan, question, how can state adapt critical infrastructure but include use of state-owned railroads for expanding public transit? It's a really important question. And I think this gets into how we are properly planning and assessing our current infrastructure capacity and our current infrastructure needs. And really taking that into account and thinking innovatively about that. I know Tony and his group have worked really hard on a Portland to Lewiston rail project that's really good. And I know it's not currently in the draft suggestions as a specific option, but it is, and I did check with folks, it would be considered under the umbrella of expanding public transit use. So in terms of how can the state adapt that critical infrastructure to include state-owned railroads, I think that's something that's going to have to be for a significant detailed process that would come out of assessing and adapting our current infrastructure, which we have called for in the Transportation Working Group. It's one of our core strategies to do that. So hopefully the Climate Council will take that up, and it will set up a whole process to which we can actually take that on. See a question from John Brooking. I'm a transportation bicyclist in the Portland area. I know that in a rural state with large distance between destinations, promoting bicycling will always be a very small part of the transportation solution. I am also not totally on board with all bicycle infrastructure ideas, but I do believe there can be a role for bicyclist education in empowering bicyclists in urban and suburban areas to ride more for transportation. There are two major national bicycle education curricula, which can equip bicyclists to keep themselves safe in traffic, and education can be much cheaper than infrastructure. Are there any thoughts on the role of bicycling education in encouraging bicycling for people for whom it is feasible? The answer is absolutely, John. We have Jim Tassi, who runs the Bicycle Coalition of Maine, is one of my colleagues on the Transportation Working Group and has been a staunch advocate for making sure we have bicycle and pedestrian as transportation options in all of our suggestions. And that has been incorporated into all of that. Everything you say is absolutely true. Raising awareness, but also making it safer and more accessible for people to cycle. And it doesn't have to be in urban areas. Rural areas are potentially the best places to cycle. You can cover 5-10 miles, which people potentially are only 5 or 10 miles from a town center. So it's something that we need to incorporate into planning, and the working group did do that. Lynn Williams, no relation to me, has a question. She supports raising the gas tax. We are increasing the use of EVs. That's good. However, with the growth of EVs, we're losing gas tax money, probably even with the tax hike. Roads still need to be repaired, whether they are ridden on by electric vehicles or gas vehicles. How do we address that? Excellent question, Lynn. I touched on this a bit earlier, but I think technical stuff people may not have joined. We do need to raise the gas tax. In its current iteration, it doesn't accurately pay for our infrastructure needs. But you're absolutely right. More EVs means less gas tax revenue, but we still need to pay for our transportation infrastructure needs, and we need to look at innovative ways to pay for that, whether it's the Transportation Climate Initiative, a low carbon fuel standard, which would somehow get money, but really TCI would bring in money, a vehicle miles traveled effort, more bonding. There just needs to be more and more thought put to this. And we are going, not just thought, because there's a lot of thought being put into it. We need actual people to make hard decisions about this, because honestly, pricing transportation to pay for infrastructure can be politically hard. So we need people to have some courage and step up and say, no, we need to do this because we don't want to have roads and bridges falling apart. Question from, well, what's our time check, Todd? Looks like we have.
Yeah, we can go for about 5 more minutes.
Okay. So I see a question from Richard Peterson, who hasn't asked yet. What does the working group know about the current and future incentives for individuals to purchase electric cars, both at state and federal levels? Will expanded EVs be matched with increasing charging infrastructure in Maine? Second question, a statewide electric vehicle infrastructure plan is one of the core strategies that we have recommended to the Climate Council from the working group. So expanded EVs being matched with charging infrastructure is like the crux of that plan. How do we build out the infrastructure as well as getting EVs into people's driveways and parking spaces? What do we know about current and future incentives? We know that Efficiency Maine's recent expansion of incentives for EVs was really working and was really driving more and more purchases. The extra $1,000, $2,000 off EVs was a good thing. But again, that's EV purchasing has really been only for people of means. And we're trying to lean into figuring out ways to make those incentives that would encourage and help people of moderate and low incomes be able to purchase EVs or use EVs when needed. And so we're put a good look into that and incorporated that into our suggestions as well. So hopefully the incentives will continue and grow and in amount as well as expanded availability to other folks. Should we wrap up, Todd, or do we have time for any more?
Yeah, let's take one more question, then we have to wrap up here.
Okay, do we have any?
So folks have one last question for Mike. Feel free to type it into the Q&A box. Otherwise, we will we'll end here and we can enjoy the rest of our afternoon in the sun.
That may be it.
All right, well, that might be it. Well, to everybody who's on, thank you for joining the Climate Council webinar today and for joining this Transportation Working Group breakout. We hope that you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. You will all receive an email in the coming days with a link to the petition to sign in support of a strong climate action plan for Maine, a short survey to take, and a recording of the webinar as well. So thanks again for joining us and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Bye, everybody. Thanks very much, Mike.
Thanks, folks.